So the path is grounded in hope. And when we're shy on hope, there are ways to nourish it. And that's what we're going to look into tonight. We're going to, two things. One is what blocks us. What really blocks us from having that attitude of possibility. And the second is when we're blocked, really, how do we move into that sense of, oh, okay, it's here. I can draw on this. Hope gets blocked. It gets disabled. We contract away from a natural sense of openness or optimism when we have some experience of severed belonging. And I like that term. It's very much in the field of psychology, but I think it's useful. It's really a felt sense of severed belonging. It's not actual severed belonging. We can't be severed. We are awareness. There's no severing, but there's a felt sense from a small self perspective that we've been cut off in some way. It happens typically for many in early childhood because our parents also had severed belonging and are unable to create that kind of resonance field where we're seen and gotten for who we are, and we're embraced for who we are. So when there's not a really safe, loving, filled with understanding kind of attunement in our home life, that is a sense of being cut off. It's really interesting that researchers are discovering more and more how when there's enough nurturance, when there's really good mirroring, I see you, I get you, that is actually what activates the neural connections in the frontal cortex. So our capacity, especially the relational network in the frontal cortex that has to do with empathy and compassion, that gets activated when, as young children, we're in a resonance field. And when we're not, in other words, if we don't get seen and we don't get that loving, we don't get the full activation of our frontal cortex. We're not able to engage in relationships so fully because there's not trust. There's some sense of danger. When that happens, instead of being guided by a wholeness or an integrated brain and an awake heart, we're guided by our limbic system that looks for what's threatening and dangerous and tends not to trust others. And it's really seen, there's some animal studies that show it in a very kind of dramatic way. Some studies with chimps when the mother is erratic in mothering. Sometimes there, sometimes not. And erratic is what sets off a sense of insecurity and trauma. When the mother's erratic, the chimp babies end up binge eating, being antisocial, withdrawn, and fearful. Now, does that sound familiar? How many of us? So it really creates the groundwork for depression, because when we're cut off from a sense of that connection with others, when we're living in anxiety, the tendency is to want to push under our life energy because it's so unpleasant. So that's one level that it happens, is in childhood when there's not good enough parenting. But it also happens through our life when we have experiences of being violated or rejected or some threat to our health where we really sense that we could die, when there's dramatic accidents. Anytime we feel unsafe in some sort of ongoing way, that can end up creating that sense of severed belonging, mistrust, lack of hope. We can see it culture-wide when we really look at historically marginalized groups. So all these studies of Native American groups in Canada, United States, and how generational trauma has created this experience of depression, addiction, anxiety, the same thing we see when we humans are animals. Make things unsafe, and we lose access to hope, and we go into anxiety, depression, and addictive behavior. See it very much, it's so much in front of us right now with an ongoing oppression and violence towards African Americans. I was at teaching on the West Coast. I was the one that gave a talk at Salesforce, and one of the women I was talking to there was describing how the fear she experiences when her partner goes out to the supermarket when it's late at nighttime, because it's increasing police violence and, black men getting stopped, and never know when there's going to be some sense of right on the streets, either killed by police or attacked by a gang member. So she lives in fear. And Ta-Nehisi Coates describes this the fear for the bodily self. This ongoing sense of fear, of severed belonging, cuts us off from hope. We can't sense the possibility of what we might experience in our lives. So its biggest expression is when there's full trauma. Full trauma means we're fully severed. There's full severed belonging. We're completely gripped by the limbic system. But for most of us, if we haven't had full trauma, there are ways we have felt severed belonging, each of us. And to the extent we have, to whatever degree, that means that we're going to have some lack of access to really trusting our own body, trusting our heart, trusting that others care, trusting the earth, the web of life. I think in particular about depression because it's such a one of the most common and really excruciating versions of severed belonging, that when the life energy just depresses what's there, and the feeling of no hope. It's a real prison, a biological and psychological prison for anyone that has experienced depression knows it. When we don't have hope, it feels like torment. Hence, we begin to look at, for any of us on the spectrum, how do we reconnect? When there's severed belonging at any level, how do we reconnect? And the first thing is, again, to say, it's possible to reconnect. That the Buddha said that I wouldn't be teaching you this Dharma, this path, if it wasn't possible to be free. If it wasn't possible to reconnect. If it wasn't possible to be happy. So freedom's possible. It's an intrinsic capacity within us. And there's a pathway. And we're going to look at now how to reconnect to the aliveness in the moment and to our lives.